I'm Dusty and welcome back to my lab. Today I have a very important video to share with you. I think it's going to be one of the more important ones that I put out on this channel. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about knowledge and how it can be very obvious that it's directly translatable to power, even with just a very simple toy example. Then I want to talk a little bit about humor and how I think that we need to start thinking a little bit more about humor and how I think that we can use it as a general tool to better interact with and understand one another better. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So here's my example. You can have a little bit of a image here behind me. You come up to a tree and someone tells you, I have this 100 kilogram weight and I want you to lift it 4 feet in the air. Now, if you were really strong, just naturally speaking, then maybe you could lift it, like that. But if you were someone of shorter stature like me, probably couldn't. So um, what's the point? Well, the point is like here. If we have if alongside this weight we also have a pulley or the pieces of a pulley, then and I know how to configure this pulley, then I can configure the pulley and lift the weight. Now it's pretty simple, to see that if that the understanding of how to configure the parts for the pulley is somehow powerful because I can literally do a function or do an amount of work that I would not normally have been able to do just by the fact that I have that knowledge. Now, what exactly the knowledge is, how it works, how we construct it, or what the act of an engineering or invention is, like to create a tool such as a pulley, we don't really need to think about that. I mean, the bigger point is just that here we have a very clear example of how knowing something previous to a prior situation, knowing something prior to a situation, we can do something that we wouldn't have previously been able to do just by the fact that we had some prior experience and know how to manipulate our environment to do what we would like. Now, this is very interesting because we live in a capitalistic society where essentially we've delegated all power to money, and really in a capitalist society, our success test is how much money you've accumulated. Really, like how much power, how much peace of mind and fluidity in your decision making you can have, how much earth you can move, or how much weight you can lift, just by virtue of how much money you have in your pocket. But beyond that, beyond how many dollars you have in your pocket, you still have what's in your mind. And in this example, you can see that's a real currency. Like it in the same way that you can, pull out 100 and pay someone else who, with a pulley or someone who knows how to construct one to lift that weight. If you know how to do it yourself, then you are more powerful. You have you forego that need to have that money. And I mean, when we think about it a little bit, this is pretty obvious. I mean, this is why people go to school. I mean, not knowledge is supposed to be powerful. Now that's why we pay for it. But it's real easy to forget, like just how significant this is, and beyond that, we live in a day and age now where your knowledge is basically limited only by your inquisition, like how much you want to learn. Because we have, if you're lucky enough to have access to an unrestricted internet, then you can learn most things, and especially if you have like a basic framework of how to teach yourself things, which the knowledge of that type of knowledge is even more interesting. So how do you teach people the basic building blocks with which to teach themselves more things? These are interesting questions, I think. Um, so to move on to humor, and just like how I think that this all ties in, humor is one of the most confusing, interesting, and enjoyable things to think about for me. And I've only recently started thinking about it, and I'm really excited because I think that this is something that is being stifled and not really seen for its usefulness. Now, humor in general is very confusing. We've been trying to figure out exactly what it is, and we've come up with different ways of understanding the different forms that it can take. And as we can see, as we will see, it can take many, many different forms. And even just pinning down, how each person is experiencing those different forms at any time is not easy. It's extremely contextual. Um, so just for an example, I'll bring up one of one of my favorite comedians, and one of my favorite shows that was Chappelle's Show, and he has a sketch called Tyrone Biggums. And I mean, personally, I don't think it's really one of his funniest sketches. I think that I'm not even sure, and this is, more commentary on the whole idea, what was in his mind, and even how much does it matter? That's another good question. How much does the intent of the comedian matter, in the value or in value of his work, his or her work? And so in the sketch, it's basically this caricature of a black crackhead who comes into a white private school and starts just wreaking havoc, basically, and just being this absurd character in this absurd context. And so clearly absurdity, or like breaking from the norm, is part of comedy. It's like, but what part of it is kind of unclear. So nowadays, this, I'm not sure how old this sketch is, but I mean, it's probably 10 years old, or almost, at least. And we might look back on that now and think, wow, that was insensitive, like that's unacceptable. Like, and we might even want to hold Dave's feet to the fire, because how could he, like, what was he thinking? Like, what was the intent of it? Like, why is it funny? I think that's a better question. Like, why is it funny? Or is it funny? And who is it funny to, and why? So it's like being on different parts of the joke. It's like, there's a part of the joke where Dave, only Dave might be in on. Okay, and like in a real sense, everyone's only in on their own part of the joke. Everyone has their own unique context in which they're enjoying the joke, and yet we're all laughing at it. Or some of us are and some of us aren't, and we sometimes don't understand that. Sometimes we laugh even if we don't think something's funny. Sometimes we're crying when we're laughing, or sometimes we're crying when we're upset. The emotion of laughter and humor and weeping and misery are very strangely connected. They're involuntary, and they're kind of compulsive. Like you can't. It's like kind of like trying to hold in a sneeze sometimes. If something's like really really funny, it's hard to not laugh. And your laugh is characteristic, in the same way that a sneeze is. It's like if you're really belly laughing, like it's very hard, to just stop. And I mean, the question is like, what can we and should we, and how should we, and why should we, hold someone's feet to the fire for finding something funny, and beyond that, like, can we maybe have a conversation about why we think things are funny, and why we are thinking things are funny, and also, and within the context of understanding that we might not, like, none of us are fully consciously aware of why we think things are funny, and maybe also just take advantage of the fact that we are in, one prerequisite to laughter, I think, is a feeling of safety and peace of mind. Like, it's pretty hard to laugh if you're drowning, as an extreme example, and if you can be drowning in a lot of different ways. So the context has to be balanced in such a way that you're not needing or wanting, right? Now, this ties back to the idea of superiority, okay? And like, maybe this is a way that we can analyze the Tyrone Biggums sketch, and like in this way it might be problematic, right? So like, an older conception of humor was that humor was mostly derived from a state of superiority. So you would laugh down at someone, you would look down on them, and know that you are superior, and so you can laugh at them and their inferiority, basically. And because of this, this was like Aristotle, Greek time. It was looked down on as a moral weakness, and like as generally morally deplorable. But I think that it's a little bit more than that. If we analyze it a little bit deeper, I mean, surely I think that there probably are people who are just laughing at the poor fool who try as he might cannot seem to succeed, and will even go out of their way to sadistically try to foil their efforts. But I think that in the larger scheme, it's something more like more people, or like the larger reaction is something like Schadenfreude, where you're taking amusement in the larger justice of the situation, where it's like, oh, this person's getting their just desserts because they were arrogant and ignorant and didn't listen to their peers or listen to their own common sense, and clearly that can go wrong. You can not understand the real psychological situation that they went through, or what actually happened, and just be assigning characteristics to this person or to the situation, and that I think that that's a real worry. But generally speaking, the idea for most people isn't that I'm I'm just superior and powerful, and I'm an evil, overlord, and I'm gonna cause as much pain and destruction to this person, and I find that just in and of itself funny. It's something more than that. It's like a satisfaction with the world, and like sharing laughter is not only a social cue, but also just a sharing in the fact that we have a shared peace of mind. And what's funny about it is that we're all sharing a different form of the same peace of mind. It seems like we're all in on a different part of the joke, if that makes sense. Um, so what's the point of this? I think that the point is that hopefully just me talking about my own thinking about this joke or this skit has maybe disarmed you in the sense that I, I'm even if I found it funny for reasons of of the absurdity of here is this person juxtaposed in this very bizarre situation. So just the overall absurdity is bizarre, but then just there's a dark aspect to it too, where it's wow, that he's making fun of something incredibly dark, and that's powerful. So this is another aspect that I want to talk about, because I think that this is almost the most fundamental root of what laughter was supposed to be, or what it most fundamentally is. Um, it's the idea that we can turn a situation of failure into a situation of learning and progress. Okay, so some guy in the Schadenfreude situation, it's some guy's oh, I'm gonna do a jump, and everyone knows this, everyone's seen videos. It's some guy thinks he's gonna do a jump, and then we all watch, and then it's interesting, what happens next. It's depending on how it goes, it's if he lands the jump, woo, that's great. If he doesn't land the jump, that's bad, but it can also be really funny, depending on how bad it is, right? So it's as long as there's no harm and no foul, in the sense of severe injury, then we learn something, and we watch something spectacular and absurd, So it's just it's complicated. It's so incredibly complicated, and just in analyzing almost any humorous incident, we can understand so much about psychology and how we interact with one another. And on top of that, we can have some sense of similarity in that, we're all laughing and enjoying together. We need to make communication and knowledge seeking fun, and funny. It needs to be enjoyable. It needs to be, a communal act where we're not at one another's throats. And that comes back to the last point that I want to make. So, in psychology and spirituality, there's this thing called the cosmic joke, and it's kind of just the concept of the absurdity of existence and human existence, and just existing, living in general. It's similar to this. I think that it's time to show you this. So this is an illusion, or whatever. It's something. I don't know. It's a picture. And I mean, depending on what you see, it doesn't really say much about you. Other than maybe you've seen a duck or maybe you've seen a rabbit, but it's clearly both, and in the absurdity of existence, you have a choice, it seems like. It can be funny, and it can be, wow, this is absurd. There's all this suffering and hilarity and randomness and order, and it's all so confusing, but it's so interesting. Or we can take the other route, and this is the route that I think we've unfortunately been taking, where it's everything is dread and suffering and pain and misery, and there's injustice. And clearly both are true, but I think that one is clearly a solution, and one is a failure. One is going to give us more of the failure, and one is going to possibly, hopefully, give us more success. We need to start talking to one another a little bit better. Start trying to have some fun with one another, trying to understand why, what part of the joke we're laughing at. What different aspects and what ducks and what rabbits we've seen in life, and just how we can commiserate, these differences with one another. So let's try to make one another laugh. Let's try to make one another happy. Let's try to, communicate with one another and find common ground and laugh together. I think that that's the answer. I think that in trying to understand why we think things are funny, we can understand why we live our lives in general. So, all right, that's going to be it for today. Thank you.